Okay, we're going to do another live stream. We did one last night, and I'm imagining this is probably the last stream of the week. As you may have noticed, we've been doing more live streams lately and less of the canned videos, and that's just the direction we're going in this year. I think we're going to really spend a lot of time doing this live stuff instead of some of the other type of videos. Although I like both types. For me, this is one of my favorite things right this moment. And so I hope we get a little bit of a group on here today. With the last few streams, we've had some really amazing viewer interactions and questions and conversations. And so the goal today, of course, is to always have that happen. So I'll say that a few times throughout this stream because I know people come and go. But if you're here and you've got questions, then make sure you're using the chat to get in on it. And, we'll talk about things as much as possible. The topic of today is something that it's been something I've been thinking about for a while. And I've talked about it previously. We'll talk about it today, but the topic, of course, is why Logic Pro is the best digital audio workstation. Now, I'm not expecting everyone to agree. I'm not expecting everyone to have the same feelings. But I think that my argument for myself is justifiable and something that I could actually talk about. So, let's start by going over just some of the reasons why Logic is, for me at least, the best of the workstations. And then we're also going to probably spend a little time talking about some of the things that are wrong with Logic. Logic's not perfect. There isn't a workstation out there that is perfect. There isn't a recording mechanism that meets everybody's needs. You can't go back to analog tape and not have issues. You can't. There's none of them that are perfect. And I don't care what or who you are or what your argument is. I'm admitting that Logic is flawed and every single workstation is. Of course, my favorite argument for those who claim that theirs is the best or, nearest to perfection. I always think of Reaper in this case, and everyone says, Reaper is amazing. They come out with, bug fixes, weekly, daily, depending on when they're needed. And I think, okay, so your argument for saying something's the best is that they fix its problems on a regular basis. Okay, cool. But they're all flawed. So, I'm not going to pretend like Logic doesn't have some issues here and there. But there's a few things that I really like about it. And I would say that the paradigm for this discussion is the core issue for me is that Logic, a program like Logic, is like a musical instrument. And learning to play a musical instrument is a lifelong thing. It's no matter how good you get, there's always something new to learn and perfect. And then other programs, I would say Pro Tools, even Reaper, those two really stick out in this kind of category. They're like tape machines, that paradigm. They're like, you use them as a tool, you put your musical content in the tracks, but they don't always bring a ton of creativity to the process. Logic is like an instrument. I would say Ableton is more like an instrument. Even FL Studio like an instrument to a degree. Studio One is like in the middle. It's like half instrument and half really functional recording tool. Sometimes it brings stuff to the table, but other times it just lets you bring whatever you have. And so you have to kind of figure out which one makes the most sense to you. The same with a musical instrument like a Stradivarius violin, right? Something that everyone's heard of, these incredible instruments that are worth, millions of dollars. The instrument itself doesn't make your music sound good. If I play $1 million violin, it's going to sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. I don't know how to play that. I could guess. I could, put my finger down and have the bow go across the string and maybe get one note that sounds decent, but it's not going to sound great by any stretch of the imagination. And so I think something like Logic is like that. You actually have to put in some time and effort to figure it out. This conversation with myself, I guess, started with an idea I had on one of the previous streams where it's like I want to start a weekly show where I just recap all of the stupidest things people have posted online in terms of questions about Logic. And while that's not what we're doing today, it could be. There's always just person after person who ask like stupid questions that they could easily get the answer to if they just did a little search for it. But that's okay. I mean, that's part of it. We've got to be patient with everyone at different phases of this. So I want to go over like my top 5 off the cuff favorite things about Logic. Things that I couldn't live without if I moved to a different workstation. And I've tried over the years. I've used all of the workstations at various times for various reasons. I teach things at the university that are in different platforms than Logic, partially because I try to teach the right tool for the right job. I wouldn't do like a film mix in Logic. I would do a film mix in Pro Tools or Nuendo. I wouldn't do like a lot of live performance techniques in Logic. I would do that in Ableton. So it's like you got to know the right tool for the right job in some cases. But 5 things that I've tried. Like I'd spent some time over the pandemic really digging into Studio One, and this could be the list of like what was missing that I couldn't get to do exactly what I wanted to in the other platform. And I'll say, even with some third-party tools, but primarily with the stock set of things as much as possible. And at any point, if you're watching and have questions or want me to follow up with something else, use the chat. I see that we've got about, we're getting close to 10 people on the stream, and introduce yourself, put some comments in there, questions, your own thoughts as we go through some of this stuff. And so that'd be great. So I'm almost done with this song. I've been using the song for the last couple streams, and I finally am pretty close. I just took it down to the big studios yesterday and listened to it on the big Genelex and the small Genelex, different headphones in the car. And it's getting pretty close to what I'm thinking. I can still see some warts on it, but to what I'm thinking is done. And so this is what we're going to, probably one of the last videos we're going to have this song featured on. And then we'll move on to the next song that I'm working on. But number 1 would be, of course, the drummer capabilities in Logic. Not just the drummer track, but the drum kit designer, the drum machine designer, and all of the functionality that goes with those things. So this right here, this particular interface, I like. Simple on the left, complex on the right, loud on the top, soft on the bottom, and then beat presets, and then all of our other tweaking over here, including things like the feel, which is the push-pull, the ghost notes, hi-hat functionality. All of this stuff speaks to my ability as a programmer, in the sense that I'm not a drummer, and I like that these drummer profiles bring something to this, and I use them quite a bit. We have the straight ahead drummer tracks, but we also have the producer kits, which break them all out into their individual microphones. Everything about this I like, minus the fact that I wish we had like 50 more drummers in different styles. So that's like the big weakness, but everything else is a big strength. And I use this on all of the songs that I'm writing. Every once in a while, if the opportunity arises, I take a song and I get a real drummer to play on it. But for the most part, I'm super happy with these. The only people that ever complain about drummer track drums are people who are like traditionalists in the music industry, I would say, and they can say whatever they want, but you get into this and I can program exactly what I want, even if the standard patterns don't fit. You can convert it to MIDI and move things around and add fills and cymbal crashes and all of this stuff. So this part of the song, I'm using both the Drum Machine Designer, which is up here, with we have just a step sequencer pattern that I've got going, and the actual acoustic drum. Is this really the SoCal? It might be. Let me actually look real quick. Yeah, it is the SoCal kit, which is one of the default ones, but it's just like a layer. So here's what they sound like together. As you turn around, as you spin, that's what I want, but I'm afraid to proceed. Do I see what I see? And actually, this demonstrates one of my other, so this will be my number 2 favorite thing. Let me solo these 2 kits out. Which is the groove track. And the groove track ties so many things together for me in my projects. That's the little star you see over here. I'll zoom this up above my head. That little star right there means that this is the groove track, and that anything that has a check mark is following that. So this is the match groove track checkbox. And so I've got this thing I programmed up here, and even if this drummer had a different feel, it's going to essentially quantize it so that the two play together. I mean, that's super useful. It means I don't have to worry about if one of these was different than the other. They're going to play nice together no matter what. So super useful tool. This works with audio, MIDI, and so you can actually go through and have all of your performances. You do one thing that you like the feel to it, and then all the other stuff will match it. That's super useful because it means I can come through easily combining different elements without having to worry about one of the things that sometimes you have to worry about, which is matching the feel of the different elements. And so I use the groove track almost on everything in one way or another, either big or small. With the drummer, back to the drummer for a second. Sure, we need some more different styles and continuously added patterns and whatnot. But there's so much customization. It's like you don't have to sound like anybody else using this right off the bat. Because you can come through and change out the kit pieces a little bit. If you're using the producer kits, you have far more choices, and that's fine. But you can tune them differently and dampen them differently with our different crashes. All of that we can do. Producer kit adds all of the options. This one stays within the kit you've got chosen, essentially. But then this is just MIDI data, and so you can always just use whatever kit you want, third party or not, and use this MIDI data to control it. So you have a lot of choices there in terms of using the source material in different ways. So you don't ever have to be like, well, I felt really limited by the drummer track. If you feel limited by the drummer track, you're using it wrong. You need to expand how you're thinking about it and realize that you get to do whatever you want with it. Some people are like, well, you can't load your own samples. And it's like, of course you can load your own samples. Like, what kind of foolish talk is that? You just drag this functionality someplace else, or let's do a new drummer track for a second here, right? So here's this SoCal, and let's take out the drummer and put in like an empty drum machine designer. It's still using all of that drummer patterns, and you can load any file you want into here. And so you can come through and add that stuff and make it whatever you want. I mean, there's no limitations here at all. And these can be pretty much anything, because it's not just you load up a file. You can load up one of the synthesizer tools. We can load up, let's see, go here. So it's like we can load up an instrument in here, any of them, which means we can do one of the quick samplers and like create a percussion instrument with a microphone. We can do a full sampler, ultra beat. Here's the drum synth over here. I mean, it's like you can do anything you want with this. There's absolutely no limitations when it comes down to it. It's only a limitation in your imagination if you think that the drummer track is somehow limiting. Groove track, that was number 2. Allows us to sing things together. Amazing functionality, even works with audio. Not always what you would want or expect, but certainly has the ability to do that. Okay. From those, normally I would go to something like the replace or double drum track, but I don't have a project up that has a drum kit there. But certainly that ties in with those two, where you can just take an acoustic recording you made of something and swap out the different elements with all the different files that we have, etc. So then for number 3, I'm gonna have to say the synthesizers that we have in Logic. And we have some of the biggest, most beastly synthesizers known to humankind, and some of the ones that are unexpectedly not beastly, but are really simple in some ways. Some of the old school things. So for instance, we have like the ESE. It's like an old string synth. Something so simple like that, through retro synth, which is a more simplified synthesizer, but seems like everything in a way. It has the analog, the sync versus subtractive synthesis, a wavetable synthesizer, and a frequency modulation synthesizer. All of those under one interface. I mean, why did we need that? But we have it. That's cool. All the way up through Sculpture, which is, as many of you who've watched my channel know, one of my favorite synthesizers. It's really a modeled synth more than a traditional synth, but I would still consider it a synthesizer because it synthesizes sound. Default patch is so funny. All the way up to perhaps the godfather of modern synthesis, which is on the same level as any other of these type of beast instruments, which is Sculpture. I'm not saying that it can do things that others can't, but it certainly can do things which are incredible. Both Sculpture and Alchemy, I've done recent video series, live streams on these instruments. So if you're interested, check those out. I'm not going to go through them right now. But some real powerful instruments and things that are incredible. So you can almost think of any sound that you'd want from any type of synthesis, and you're going to have that tool someplace in these. People sometimes try to throw me and they're like, well, does it really have vector synthesis? And I'm like, it has it in multiple places, ES2 being one of them. with our vector options here. We also have a version of vector synthesis in Alchemy itself when we look at the morph tool. So we've got that. We've got wavetable synthesis in retro, subtractive. Additive is in Alchemy. Modeled is in sculpture. There's one type that we don't kind of have, which is the Casio version of digital sequencing, digital synthesis, which is similar to frequency modulation, but we don't have a frequency modulation synthesis tool which has like the multi algorithm carrier modulator system like a DX7. We have a simplified version, and it's not quite enough. I wish we had more there, but we have almost every single type. Then, if we look at the other instruments, the sampling tools in Logic are unmatched by anybody, not even Contact. Now, Contact for a long time has been kind of like the holy grail of synthesis, or sampling rather, and it's good, but it has fallen up to the side just a little bit because they haven't done much innovation recently. They've stayed, great. I'm not saying they're anything but great. But Logic Sampler and Quick Sampler have one major benefit, and that is they're part of Logic. So they're part of this bigger structure, so they can be more tightly integrated in than any third-party things. And so, in addition to like the sampler, which is really powerful, and the Quick Sampler, which is like one of the really coolest additions of the last couple of years, reminiscent of what Simpler did in Ableton Live, which is also really great. But we have that tied in with the auto sampler functionality, which allows us to create instruments automatically. Anything that accepts MIDI data, you can turn it into a sampled instrument automatically just by setting up some parameters. I don't know if you've ever used it. If you haven't, you should definitely experiment with it. Auto sampler right here. You set up all these parameters, and it just is incredible. So range, sample, how many times, round robin, velocity layers, auto looping, all of that stuff. It's just amazing what this particular tool does, and that is put in here with this. So you can turn almost anything that accepts MIDI, and now that includes things like old voltage controlled synthesizers, because if you have a MIDI to CV converter, which if you have a Behringer synth for just a couple $100, you already have that, and so it's pretty cool how well that ties into it. So as a workstation, if I'm doing sampling, there's no other workstation I'm going to. It just makes zero sense right this moment. That can change. People leapfrog each other, right? So one company comes out. For a long time, Logic was behind the sampling curve. EXS24, some people may feel nostalgic for that, but it's insane to feel nostalgic for it. The new sampler has like flex time and has pitch correction, and auto looping, and so many tools which make sampling better. But the EXS24 was hard to use and complicated, and editing was really tedious. And so don't miss the EXS24 because there's not much to miss there. That's for sure. Okay, Gigada, thanks, man. Happy New Year to you as well. Probably administrative stuff would be a topic for 23. For example, how can I hide boring stuff? Sampler, where to put custom sample libraries. And then it says auto sampler plus micro brute equals analog multi-sampler. And that's exactly right. So why? A lot of people would like to, I'm assuming if I talk about the auto sampler, there's enough people who say, cool, but what does it have to do with me? has a few things to do with anybody. One of them is, and this is not unethical, I don't think, but certainly it borders on it. But say you have a friend who has a microbrew and you don't, and you just bring it over, you like make a patch with it, you auto sample that patch, and then you take that patch with you and leave the synth at your friend's house because he owns it. And so it's like you can do a lot with that type of mentality. You can acquire sounds that you want. Now, the next thing, say you have a song that uses a third party, like an external synth or an external instrument, and you don't want to have to set it up or load that patch every single time. Well, you can get the part you like, but then you're like, I don't want to have to use this every time. You can auto sample that instrument, load it as a software instrument, and then you don't have to like use the external one. You can use that for something else. Benefits to that. So you could record the output of that instrument into a track and just say it's good. But later, if you're going back and working with that part again and you realize you want to change the note, you have to re-hook up the instrument, re-get the patch loaded. Hopefully you have it. If it's an analog synth, you might not even have patch control. And so you have to like figure it out and reset it all up and then re-record the whole thing. If you've turned it into an auto-sampled instrument, you can just change the MIDI note and continue on. Bjorn says, I auto-sampled like 50 presets on my old JV 1080. 2 weeks later, Roland released the JV 1080 AU. That's so typical. However, let's not forget that the 1080, if you sampled it from the actual 1080, there's a number of people who still say that the digital to analog conversion on there makes it sound different than the full software version. So you can rest assured that what you got is still cooler because it's from the real deal. Gigadet says, I use the sampler as a polytimbral synth voice and route everything through my Arturia. So that brings up the other thing with auto sampling. If I use, for instance, my ARP 2600, right? ARP 2600, mono synth, one note at a time, no matter what. You can use the oscillators. There's 3 oscillators. They can all be triggered and you can get like a harmony, but it's still just one input trigger at any given time. So you can't do like 2 melodic lines simultaneously on that thing unless you sample it. So if I sample my 2600 and I can turn it into a polysynth, so I can actually play chords and moving lines and have counterpoint and things. So that right there takes an older synth and gives it new functionality. And it can be auto sampled as well because you have to use a CV or MIDI to CV converter and record that in it, and you're off to the races. So super awesome. In terms of Gigadeath, you saying, how can I hide boring stuff? You talking about boring stuff on the interface of Logic? Are you talking about, is that what you're referring to? I'll let you type it out. So auto sampling and sampling in general, for sure, one of the huge things. Okay, so the library. Yeah, I should have thought that's mostly what you were talking about. It's like Apple Loops. It's like, yay, I've got all this content that I no longer really use any of it. But it's all still there. And if I do need to find one thing, it's tricky to find stuff. Or, people ask for a plugin search, which I get. Apple should just copy Studio One in this one area. I can't imagine that Studio One owns the rights to it. I think you can do it in Ableton. Might be able to do it in FL Studio. I don't know about Nuendo or Cubase. or Reaper, the drag and drop functionality. So it's like I've got like a list of all my plugins and stuff. I can search through it, just drag it out on top of a track and it goes on the whole track, or drag it out on top of a clip and it just processes that clip. I mean, that would not be hard. I don't know if they're allowed. Software copyrights are one thing I don't fully have the nuanced understanding of an attorney, but certainly if one software does something really cool like that and you don't see anybody else copying it, it usually means that there's some sort of protection against doing that, but you never know. Yeah, so Gigadesk says, I really like the fact that I can customize all plugin names, my I/O and bus mapping, but the XYZ libraries. Yeah, so there's room for, I think we'll see what they do. It's like, I don't know what's happening all that much in terms of predicting. There was something that I just saw. So somebody posted this in the Logic group on Facebook, I want to say. And they were talking about it, but let me see. Oh yeah, 6 hours ago, someone said Apple just hired the guy from Universal Audio. Why is no one talking about this? That could be a sign of something happening this year. Apple getting some sort of interface thing happening, or perhaps some new DSP plugin type things. Now, I don't personally understand that. I don't think Logic or Apple wants to have a DSP unit for audio stuff. I don't think that that's the direction they're going to go. Partially because Mac Studio Ultra, right? Or Mac Pro, any of the M stuff. We don't need that with those machines. We don't need something else. Unless they found a way to really get the latency consistently at like near zero. Latency at zero, impossible. Computers need time to do something. We're not at the point where, processing happens at faster than the speed of light kind of thing. That was a metaphor rather than a literal thing. I have no idea what speeds. But we need consistently low things, low latency things, consistently all the time. And so that does help. But my Mac Ultra, I'm not running. Right now I've got it set a little higher because I was doing some stuff with AirPods Max yesterday. If you saw my live stream, that's what I talked about. But we're going to go down to 32 I/O buffer size, 32 samples for that. Now I'm using a different type of output device right now for the live stream. But this finished project, which isn't massive by any stretch of the imagination, but it's certainly not small. I'm going to push play just here in the middle someplace. I could show for you and me, you and two, in a land so far away, try to hide to stay. So it's going to be like an eternity with this type of project that I'll ever even get close to maximizing anything. You know what I mean? So we're looking at like all of these tracks, many of them just with 3 or 4 different plugins on them, 3 or 4 different buses. I mean, this is like a typical song project like this, where you can really get everything you need to sounding good with this number of tracks, and it's barely moving. So, we don't need a DSP system, but if UAD is coming, or something with UAD is coming to Apple, then it fits the MO of what Apple does in terms of buying things and then incorporating them over time. Auto Sampler was an example of that. from Redmatica in Italy. We have, of course, Camel Audio came over with Alchemy and the step effects and whatever that other one is. I don't, top of my head. Oh, the fat effects. Of course, I like the fat effects, but I don't use it a ton. And now, incorporating Dolby Atmos. They didn't buy Dolby, but I mean, they might as well have. It's just, that's how they work. They don't innovate as much. They purchase and renovate. Don't innovate, but renovate. Yeah, that's probably somebody else has said that, but that was funny. We'll see. So 2023 could be an interesting year later on with some new big things. They've got to do something because we're certainly running into some interesting stuff coming up. Okay, so we were just talking about that. The next we're kind of getting down into the area of the software that's the same as other workstations, right? So we don't have endless things that are really different or helping Logic stand out. But I will say, in terms of the included effects, that the set of default things that Logic has is about as good as anybody's. And so it's like we have a little bit of everything. All the stomp boxes for the guitar stuff and amp emulators, all the way through to, we have our EQs that are in here. And I like this vintage EQ collection. I think that some of the stuff is super useful in terms of the sound. So it's like, if you want kind of a Neve type sound on this, the old school Neve, then here we go. Or the API or the Pultec, it's like we have a little bit of all of those things. Compression, don't get me started on compression. And there have been people who have done full charts on this on the compressor we have in here. All the different algorithms, which really equate to the non-linearity of things like the attack, the release, the threshold, the knee, all of those different elements with potentially some difference in sound quality. I think you should have some, but I don't know if they're doing too much with that. But all these different ones. So it's like LA2A and 1176 and the Focusrite Red. It's like all of these are different tools that you would use in different ways. You're going to run out of musical ideas before you run out of the tools to make those musical ideas in this case. So there's so much to it. So just the overall set of tools. There's a few things which we don't have in Logic. But we'll get to that list at the end of this because we're going to talk about the other positives first, and then in about 10 minutes we'll get to the negatives, the things that suck in Logic, which we've already addressed a couple of them just, in the process, but for the most part we haven't. Let's see. Gigadeath says, I know you spoke about that in the past, but I think speaking about tools like markers, arrangement, and tone. Yeah. And I don't speak about those too much, although I do use them extensively. I don't actually have any on this particular song. I didn't arrange it that way. I think I built this one out a little differently than sometimes. I know I started this song with the original drums. Let's see what this track is. And I think when I wrote, so I just did like a little bit of that and then had I think I even just like no words. When the dark night falls. Let's see if that was. So that's where that song started. But normally I would do like a whole arrangement track and use those like my markers and move things around and all. I mean, that the arrangement stuff is not unique to Logic. I think it really is fully fleshed out in Cubase and Nuendo. Their arrangement tools are incredible. And so I think that that's what I was hoping Logic would do, but they did some other version of it. You mean signatures, different in the German localization. That makes sense. Like time signatures, is that what you're thinking? There are a lot of those basic things which I don't cover very often. Um, Mostly because this channel has always been a place for me to explore the stuff that I'm personally super interested in. And it has turned out that, we've had a good group of people follow along and, they come along on my ride. But I don't do a lot of the basics. I find I get in trouble with the basics. I get in trouble with the basics because Logic has like, 5 to 10 ways of doing everything. And when I just give you like 4 of those instead of all 5 to 10 of them, it's like people then like write comments and complain. So I've really stopped doing most of the basics types videos, mostly because it's like I don't want to have to like actually go back. I have my way of doing it, and I'm okay teaching my way of doing things, but um, there's so little. I don't write music in anything but 4/4. Every once in a while 3/4, but I don't do 5/4, or I don't even really do 6/8. Um, it's I kind of do one thing when I'm doing song production. When I'm doing scoring, sometimes it's like you'll have to do a 4/4 bar followed by a 2/4 bar just to keep you in the project's grid to match the video file. But um, a lot of that stuff I don't mess with too much. I do change key signatures when needed, but even then I don't. It's like Logic doesn't really do too much when you change that like it used to. I think it used to even do more, but it's kind of dumbed it down a little bit. Let me see, catch up on some comments. Thomas says, have you done something really crazy with a scripter? I'm not sure where other DAWs have a way to programmatically modify things. So the scripter for me, we're the second group to really do something like that. First time I used a scripter-like interface was with Contact from Native Instruments. Their sampler has scripting capabilities in it, and it allows you to do things like play a MIDI chord, and it like rewrites the MIDI to match a certain instrument, like a guitar. And I use that for the scripter all the time. That's probably one of the main reasons I use the scripter is the guitar strummer functionality. I don't think so. For those of you who don't know what the scripter is as much, I'll pull something up real quick, just a basic thing. So scripter, I've never really gotten in and actually coded anything in here. So it's 2 parts. It's these 2 windows right here. So it's a JavaScript editor essentially, and you can go through and create or even alter existing scripts. The guitar strummer is this, and here's the whole script it took to do that. But I don't use it too much in terms of deeper use. Partially because I don't code in JavaScript. I've learned parts about Java over the years, and every time I get into it, I think I need to go like watch a TV show for a few minutes. It's like hurting my brain. But there are some things in here which I have used. Trying to think. The Drum Kit Designer Remapper I've definitely used. The Drum Kit Designer Embellishments, I don't know if any of you have used that one. But I've definitely used like the filter options. I've used the probability gate, which is okay. I've never used the real-time quantizer for reasons. Sequencer is kind of a fun thing to do because you can actually come through and use it like it's like an analog sequencer, which is kind of fun, and have it programmed. But you know, they're all, I mean, so I've never done anything really crazy with it. I guess that's the real answer. I'm pretty much used a lot of this stuff face value, which I think it's a great plugin. And if I had like a real need for something custom, I would find myself still using the environment over the scripter, because with the environment, it's still icon based, dragging and dropping connections, using the transformer, which is all still text based and English, and JavaScript is just like a different language. So that's my 2 cents. And then John Laura says, can you do a demo of the Quick Sampler? I've done videos about the Quick Sampler. For me, the best part about the Quick Sampler is that anything I do in here can be moved into the Quick Sampler with very little time. We'll just do for this an Apple loop though, because it's a little simpler. I'm going to drag it over to the header, Quick Sampler, optimized. And then it does all the analysis. And then I can... You can like reprogram the kit. And it's like everything's in here. Flex. We have it follow the tempo. So if you're doing something, you want it to make sure that any expansion or contraction it does matches the tempo. Great. We can go through and do one shots or classic mode or slice mode. We can record straight into it. And then we have like just the basic modulation stuff. Other than the ability to just drag stuff in and then adjust every little nuanced thing about it. I think that's a really great instrument. That's the quick demo of the Quick Sampler. Go back and check out some of my other videos on that if you want to know more. The Gigadeath says you have to do, let's see, oh yeah, if you're doing prog metal or any serious like metal, there's a lot of nuanced types of metal. Key signatures are like the heart of it. You know what I mean? You're right. It's like that's one of those elements. And I've always, I do listen to some metal, and there's a time and a place in my own like listening habits for that, but I don't make a lot of metal. You can hear what I do. It's like I don't know, old person pop music. It's about as accurately as I can describe it, probably. And then Thomas says the note repeater and the stutter are nice for random glitches. Cool. I agree. There's a lot of cool things with that if you're going for that particular thing. That's the thing about Logic in general. It's like the people who use Logic correctly, and I think there's a right and a wrong way. Maybe not if you're, talking about a deeper philosophical discussion, but I do think there's a right and a wrong way. The right way is this. I'm sitting around and I think of an idea. I've got an idea. I go to Logic and I flesh out my idea. That's like, Logic is so good at that. It's so good at you bringing your idea to the table, and then you can go through and make it work. Right? So I mean, that's the way that it really flourishes at. If you're like, I don't really know what I want to do here, and you start letting Logic dictate your sound, if you use any Apple loops whatsoever, you're going to sound like Logic, right? You're going to sound like what this software funnels you to sound like. I know somebody who wrote a lot of songs in Logic, and it's like I could tell if I heard them on the street, like playing on the radio or wherever, I could tell instantly that they were Logic songs. Mostly because when you listen, you can hear Kyle the drummer. It's Kyle the drummer. He's the one that comes up as the default. And so it's like every pattern is a Kyle the drummer pattern from the drummer track. I mean, that's what you're going to be funneled into sounding like if you use Logic all the time. Cool. And you'll have like some Apple Loop string patches that sound just like Apple Loop string patches that have been on like a million projects from people who want an easy song without putting any creativity into it. So you have to not let Logic take you for a drive. You have to actually come up with the stuff. And I find doing that requires a few steps. One of the steps is like limit at the beginning of putting something together, limit what you're using in here at first. For me, that's important. So for me, one of the things, it's like I always have like a little trio. The retro synth is one of my favorite drum patches. And I use, let me turn on patch merging for a second. Okay, it is on. Okay. I didn't want to add a bunch of sends to this project. It's like I'm going to use one of the electric pianos. Maybe it's the classic. Most of the things that I do for my own music are written with this piano. Right? And a combination of this bass. I'll turn it down just a hair. Right? So I use that as the bass. And then I'm doing like, and maybe a piano, like a acoustic piano. But those instruments are how I start everything, because I don't want, this is just me, but I don't want me to like pull up something and be like, ooh, that is so cool, that sound. That's like inspired me to make a song. And then I build it around like a slice sample or just some random synth patch. It's like I want to come up with like a meaningful chord structure and a melody using like the same things, because I want the music to be what's different, and then I expand it. And sometimes it expands out with some of the same sounds, and sometimes it doesn't. In this case, with this song, let me go back through and just delete all these extra tracks I added. That instrumentation that started at the very beginning ended up being these right here. Let's go back. it does change a little bit for the chorus. And then it changes one more time at the bridge. I mean, those are all like, that's such a simple arrangement. There's hardly anything there. I mean, there's very few instruments. It tends to fill out pretty nicely. But the real stuff comes when I start adding in the voices. And the voices are what the actual harmony and the texture is all about. Here I am, trying hard to understand why we never met before. Imagine what we had in store here. And it's like I'm always doing these extra layers like this one right here. Trying hard to understand why we never met before. Imagine what we had in store. And there's one that's highly robotized. Half a word away from me, thinking of the thing. You can hear those maybe now that you've heard them, but in the overall mix, you probably didn't realize that those were there when I first started pushing play. Things to say, try to change our yesterdays. Now I know I miss the chance for you and me. The chorus has pretty much the same vocals as you turn with different timings, and then the bridge is like there's only like the two instruments, the drums, and then the two keyboard instruments, but then the vocals. Do you see what I see? Here you are, right where you belong, right where I belong. At the end of it all, here we are, where we started from, where we ended up, on a shooting star. Now you know just how far. And I think the only way a song like this works with so few instruments is because the way the song started was a focus on getting the actual notes, the chord progression to what I wanted it to be. And then it's like you add the melody without even thinking about the words in this case. It was literally just, me doing like a random melody. But finding something that worked in that space with the bare minimum and didn't sound exactly like something else, but felt like something a little bit fresh. And then you add all the other stuff, and it's like you can keep it simple because the concept started working. Anytime I see a project that has like 1,000 tracks, and you'll see these people online who do this, where it's like 100 different tracks, and it's like every little thing here and there. Sometimes those sound really cool. But I can only imagine simplifying that down to the critical elements isn't going to ruin it if it's a good song or if it's a song that works. But if all you have is like 100 different gimmicks to try to get people's attention, it's not going to work, no matter how many notes you have. So let's switch gears. We're going to talk for another like 2 minutes, because then I got to go. But the things I hate or dislike about Logic, there are a few things. The selection-based processing, where you can add plugins to individual audio clips. Oof, that is like the suckiest feature, if that's a feature. Other software has done that correctly. Nuendo Cubase does it with their offline process history. It's amazing. I would say these are all going to be kind of small things at first, but if I'm doing a surround project or a stereo project, so say you're doing a stereo project and you're like, you know what, let's make this a surround project, and you switch over, you add one track gets moved to surround, it like changes your stereo output and it removes all the effects or hides them all, and then everything goes out through the surround thing with an unprocessed stereo output track. It's really weird. It's like, why can't I just have two different buses at the end, and the stereo one and the surround one get mixed together afterwards? So that's kind of a pain. The lack of ability to have multiple types of surround sound. So you can only choose one at a time. I can only have a 5.1 or a 7.2 7.4.2 or 7.2.4, or a quadraphonic. It's like you can only have one of those formats ever, and so you can't have multiple surround types of tracks in your project. That's super pain in the butt if you're doing any kind of like spatial audio. And then some of the more obvious big things like plugin search. It is a pain sometimes when you're looking for something and you have a lot of different plugins. I would say one of Logic's biggest weaknesses and strengths, unfortunately, is that it's owned by Apple. And Apple kind of does what it wants to do whenever it wants to do it. I don't like that. I wish they were hungrier as a company to help us. And I think that their agenda is not always pure. That's cool. But kind of a pain at the same time. There's let's see. There's a few other, like they address some things in their latest version that were on our minds, but in the chat, for those of you who are watching, there's about 11 or 12 of you. What are you thinking? Like, what are some of the weaknesses that you don't like in Logic? Instrument quality, as well as being a strength, is also a weakness a little bit. The studio strings only sounds mediocre. The brass sounds a little bit better, but still not amazing. It's a little clunky. So it can be kind of confusing to do things. I know I hear this from people all the time saying Logic is so intuitive, and I don't know what planet they're from, but nobody on their first day of using Logic thinks it's intuitive. That just is not the language of Logic. Let me give you an example. Settings, right? Logic Pro, we're going to go into the settings, which used to be called preferences, but whatever. General, let's go to movie, right? Wait, there's movie project settings and then the movie settings. Let's go to movie project settings. Now we're in a whole different set of settings that aren't in the first one. Of course, the biggest difference here is that one of them are global settings and the other ones are project settings. But it isn't identified that way here. It just says Logic Pro settings. Then you come down here and project settings is in a different whole menu. They're trying to disassociate the two, and all they do is confuse anybody who's brand new to this whole thing. They make one of these changes. They look the same, right? And they have like audio and audio with the same icon, and they make a change, and all of a sudden they open up a new project and they're like, wait, I just changed that setting. Why is it now different here? But this one's not different. So it's like a total disaster that they have these things without fully clarifying why they're like this. How hard would it be to say global settings changes for all projects? And the other one would be like project settings on a project by project basis. I mean, they could do some language in here to explain that. That wouldn't be such a hard thing to do. Not really. And so we go from there, right? It's like we have our menus that are down here and our menus that are up here. It can be an intense thing to learn all of that stuff. A lot of things are hidden from people's understanding at first. What do sends on faders even mean to somebody, right? It's like they're using lingo from analog days, kind of, or console days, and throwing it at people. And it's like, whoa, now they're yellow, now they're gray, but they're different places. What is it's like some of this stuff can be so intimidating to use. And I don't run into anything, but I've been using Logic for a very long time. And it's really hard to imagine that somebody can just easily do this and use it. Properly, at least. Thomas says, I wanted to put 2 modifiers to the Alchemy XY pads, but the learn only ties it to the YX axis. Yeah, I've run into that a couple places. Maybe that's the only place, but every once in a while when you do the learn function, not everything shows up. And so that becomes kind of an issue. One of the ways I get around this is by using the smart controls, which, if you're coming in and actually programming it using, I don't know if I can drag that up or not. I guess not. You're doing parameter mapping, so I can come down here, for instance, and you can actually go in and look at all of the parameters instead of having to learn it by dragging. So so many things. Let's see. Yeah, so the sampler here, it would be under Alchemy at this point, and you'd see all the stuff for Alchemy. I just don't have Alchemy loaded on this track. And then you attach those here, and then you do, under here, you can do an external assignment from like your keyboard or something. But you can route some of those things in creative ways and get kind of a similar thing. So it's like there's always ways, but it's like complex. You have to have a degree in Logic to figure out some of those more nuanced things and mess with it for a long time. Oh, another thing that I wish we had would be MIDI effects for audio channels. Just the ones that apply, right? Not all of them. But some of the modulator would be really cool to be able to load up on an audio track and have it control audio track things. That would be cool. Not necessarily super critical, and expand it out, because right now the modifier MIDI effect can only control other effects, but I want it to actually control things below the effects, panner, levels, the mute solo buttons, everything. Well, we've gone about an hour and 8 minutes. I'm running out of time. Last question opportunity, if anyone has anything they want to discuss for a second. The reality is Logic is a great piece of software, just like all of the other workstations. And the reality is also that it's only the best one if you make it the best one for yourself by learning it. If you're really good at Ableton, then great. Ableton's probably the best workstation for you. If you're really good at Pro Tools, then great. Use Pro Tools. If you're the best at Reaper, you should probably cry yourself to sleep at night. Because that's just what you should do. But that's just my 2 cents on that particular workstation. But if we don't have any other comments or questions, we are drawing to a close. Next time I do a stream, which might be tomorrow, We will be looking at I'm going to start a new song, start working on a song that I haven't put on here, and so we'll get working on that. But otherwise, without comments or questions, thanks for joining. Thanks for being here. We've had 128 views over the stream, which is a decent number. A lot of people talking. Thanks, Gigadeath, Thomas Grosser, John Lara, Bjorn, Hoagland. You are all the best. Thanks for being here. And we'll do another stream. I'm guessing I'm going to try to do one tomorrow, because then it's the weekend and I won't want to do any streams until next week. But we'll find a new topic to talk about. Maybe something we talked about here in more depth. Maybe it'll just be the start of a new song and working on that. But otherwise, have a great day, and I will talk to you all some other time.